How do we ensure that we screw our kids up as little as possible?
Children are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for.
My mom once told me, "Oh, Shulin, you're praising your son too much. Better zip it. Don't praise them in front of them." And my therapist said, "You know, Shulin, sure, don't praise your son. And pretty soon he'll end up in this therapist chair."
It's okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually very hard. You know, when you had to work out so many issues and sometimes you feel so alone.
Yes.
But yeah, thank God I saw a therapist and it helped me really see my mom with more empathy and also see myself with more empathy. Yeah. Why is it so hard though for most people when they talk about their own moms? Before we dive into this episode, I'll be really grateful if you could like and subscribe if you're on YouTube or rate if you're on Spotify. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, welcome to this episode of The Real Reason. Today's episode is actually with a therapist. And today, we're going to talk about parents and parenting. Welcome, Janet.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So, Janet, can you share with the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm currently working in a private practice. I've been working for over 2 decades as a clinician across different settings, both in restructured hospitals, to corporate, to private settings. I work with a diverse range of people, not just with mental health conditions, but also with medical conditions. For example, people who are going through cancer or chronic health issues such as type 1 diabetes or chronic pain. So that's kind of the work I'm doing at the moment.
So Janet, a lot of us are very brutal to ourselves. We say stuff like, "You're worthless, you're lazy, you're not working hard enough, just snap out of it." But most of us would never say that to our child. So what's the real reason that so many of us treat our feelings like they are problems that need to be fixed?
I think that relates back to how we've been brought up to think of feelings as weak, and that we should not act on our feelings, but only on reason. And I think a lot of us are also more accustomed to being motivated in a sense of being scolded and criticized, because in schools, our parents would often, that's where we start hearing these things, right? That you're lazy, you should work harder. Oftentimes, we start hearing them in childhood from family members, from schools. So we've internalized that way of speaking to ourselves. And I get that it's coming from a good place, because whether it's our educators or parents that are telling us that their intention is to try and motivate us to do better.
Yes, always. In fact, they think it's reverse psychology. The more I tell my daughter, in that case my mom, like, "You're lazy," maybe that will make her more hardworking.
Right? So we have a lot of evidence now that yes, negative motivation can work, but generally people respond better to positive motivation than negative motivation. So if you imagine if someone for years and years have heard this message, right, that you're lazy, and I think it's especially true for my clients with ADHD, right, my neurodivergent population, where they've been told they're lazy, they are dreamers, they are not working hard enough. Repeated time and time again, these messages do sink in, and we've internalized them as our self-identity. So this is how then we also speak to ourselves. And of course, we don't view our friends that way, so we don't speak to them that way.
But I don't say that to my children. You know, I have 2 sons, 6 and 9, and I'm always, in fact, I think I'm overcompensating. I'm like, "You're amazing, you're doing great, you're going to grow up to be amazing," and sometimes I'm like, "Oh, am I overdoing it?" But anyway, with my children, I still see them that they sometimes berate themselves. So when they make a mistake, they're like, "Oh, I'm so bad, I'm so bad. You know, they say that, my 6-year-old. And I'm like, no, you're not. I'm very concerned. Where is it coming from? And I realize all of us, it's a universal feeling. We all feel we're not good enough. Why is that the case?
I think for people who feel like they're not good enough, it relates to their self-worth. That if you have low self-worth, there's this perpetual sense that I'm not good enough. And much of their lives then revolve around what can I do to feel better about myself. And I think there's an important distinction between self-worth and self-esteem. These two terms oftentimes get used interchangeably, but they do mean different things. So self-worth is a person's intrinsic belief in their value. And that's not something you need to work for. You have intrinsic value just by existing. So that's what's self-worth. Self-esteem, on the other hand, is our evaluation of ourselves. So that's based sometimes on our abilities, our achievements. And so you notice with self-esteem, that can fluctuate a bit more. For example, with work. So if somebody gets retrenched, right, then you see their self-esteem drop. Whereas self-worth is a lot more stable and consistent over time and is less impacted by external circumstances.
So if I'm a parent and I hear my son speaking unkindly to himself, is that an issue of self-worth or self-esteem?
Well, it depends on the context. In the example you gave, he was doing some work and then he made that comment. So he was probably evaluating his ability at that point in time. So I would say that's more related to self-esteem.
Okay.
So it is tricky finding the balance, because if we are always positive and only ever say nice things, then I think the person might also grow up with an overinflated sense of self.
Yes.
Right?
Do you see that now? A lot of parents overcompensating?
I think balance is very difficult to find, right? And so, like you shared earlier, that if you grew up and you had more negative messages, and that's why you wanted to make sure that your children didn't go through the same thing, then yes, oftentimes you'll see parents swing over to the other side. And that's what we refer to as sort of intergenerational trauma as well. That
Also, it's a trauma response.
it is.
Wow.
Right? So then finding that balance to, I think none of us are perfect. We're going to make mistakes. So we also need the ability to take in feedback. And feedback can always be positive. So that's why it's important to be able to hear both sides of the story, because that makes us more well-rounded.
Okay, for the parents who are listening in, I'm asking because I'm curious, how do we ensure that we screw our kids up as little as possible? Because we're all screwing our kids up in some way, shape or form.
Yeah, so children are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. And this idea of good enough parenting, we do not need to be perfect parents in order not to screw our children up. But I think for the most part, if we're attentive to them, they understand when we have our off days, we're a bit more impatient with them and we may not speak as kindly to them. They will survive those days and they're not going to get traumatized by that. But it's more that if it's persistent, it's something they hear daily, then that's something I would be a bit more concerned about.
In fact, I feel that I'm definitely a better parent because I've worked on my old childhood wounds. And I didn't realize that a lot of emotional needs were not met when I was a kid. I had no idea that, for instance, I didn't get the affirmation I needed. And I can't blame my mom. I love my mom. It's just she parented me the best way she could. And then I realized I grew up needing a lot of validation. And then now I realize I'm giving too much, maybe, validation to my children. My mom once told me, oh, Shulin, you're praising your son too much. Better zip it. Don't praise them in front of them. And I said this to my therapist, and my therapist said, you know, Shulin, sure, don't praise your son. And pretty soon he'll end up in this therapist chair. So that imagery really stuck. And now I am moderating, okay? Everything in moderation. Yes. Don't overdo it, and praising my son for the effort.
I'm hearing there's some concern you have about overpraising your child now. But again, it's then recognizing that the degree you're overpraising your child probably correlates to the degree that you felt you weren't praised. Because I think that all living creatures seek balance and homeostasis. So whenever I see behavior that seems to be out of proportion, right? Immediately that tells me what the amount of deficit that they had experienced, because that's us trying to find balance.
Yes. And I want to talk a little bit more about the parent and child relationship, adult children. So I'm 42 this year. And my mom, I love her, but I did have to go through this period where I had to heal. And I had no idea I needed to, because I just thought, oh, we have a great relationship and everything, until something happened. And then I realized, hang on a minute. And I think there was a turning point for me when I could, with the help of my therapist, see my mom as
a person.
Yes, as a flawed adult human being just doing her best. So that was a game changer for me.
Yes, I think we are very familiar with several life transitions. For example, a child going into adolescence, right? And we expect sort of this rebellious stage. What is less talked about is the transition that also occurs when, as an adult, the way we relate to our parents need to be different, and we view them with different eyes. As a child, when you look up at your parent, they are like almost demigods. They can do no wrong. They are so intelligent. They know everything. So that relationship is unequal because parents are placed on a pedestal. And because children's brains aren't developed enough, they look up to parents as role models. But then as we get older and we start realizing our parents are also human beings, and like you mentioned, flawed human beings, there's this disconnect in our brains.
Yes.
It's like, I don't know how to think about my parents now. I don't know how to feel. So I oftentimes would tell the parents of adult children that, you need to develop a different relationship with your child, because I get lots of adults coming in and telling me, my mom is still treating me like the 15-year-old, even though I'm 50 now. All right. So
that's hilarious.
Exactly. So parents would kind of still get stuck in that old way of parenting. And similarly as children, that even when we become adults, sometimes we still get stuck in that way of perceiving our parents as well, that they should know it all. And so then it's very confusing when we think they should know it all, but then I'm noticing, all the parenting mistakes that they had made with me. So, we can't kind of make sense of that. So when we reach adulthood and we can start seeing that our parents are also individuals with their own histories that have affected them and have influenced how they parent us, I think we can start holding more compassion towards our parents. And I think our parents also get tired of being put on a pedestal. So this is when we can start having different relationships, in a way more authentic, genuine relationships, relating with them on less of this unequal relationship dynamic and a bit more on the same level as adults.
And having more compassion,
Yes.
I think really goes a very long way. Because when you put your parent on a pedestal, which I definitely did, I have very elevated expectations of them.
Exactly.
And when these elevated expectations are not met,
Exactly.
I then throw an adult-sized tantrum. And then my mom would also have like another tantrum, and it's just not helpful.
That's right.
Yeah, but I had to learn it the hard way. Okay, so I want to talk about childhood wounds because people don't like to talk about it because it almost seems unfilial that you're disrespecting your parents or you're airing your dirty linen in public when, let's face it, childhood is a difficult time. And now I know not just for the kid sometimes, but also for the parent. And until I became a parent myself, I never truly appreciated how tough it must have been for my mom. So it's I guess it's really been.
It's okay, right?
Yeah.
It's not
it's
an easy
actually
job.
very hard. You know, when you had to work out so many issues and sometimes you feel so alone.
Yes.
But yeah, thank God I saw a therapist and it helped me really see my mom with more empathy and also see myself with more empathy. Yeah. Why is it so hard though for most people when they talk about their own moms?
I think that we haven't had the perfect parents that we had hoped to get, right?
Yeah.
When we are children, our brains, like I mentioned, aren't as developed. We tend to think in very black or white terms, right? And as you said, when our expectations are here and then reality is here, that mismatch, we get these painful feelings. These painful feelings are just telling us about that mismatch in expectations.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that people don't talk so much about with parenting, if you see on social media, it's all the joys of parenting,
Yes.
how meaningful it is. But when we become parents, I think it brings up so much mixed emotions. Like you said, you started having more empathy for your mom when you realized, gosh, this parenting thing is not easy.
Yes.
And at the same time, also then when we become parents, we try to do better. And when we do better for our children, sometimes that also brings up questions of, why couldn't my parent have done that for me? And then that might even lead to questions like, then what's wrong with me that I did not get this? So of course, it's going to bring up this whole mixed bag of emotions, and it's complicated because we're thinking back about the past when we're in the present, and then we're thinking about the future generation. So all of that really is a lot to process. Yeah. This is why I encourage, parents to go for therapy.
Yes. Every parent should go for therapy. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I had I would say, pretty good childhood because a roof over my head. We were middle class. I never had to worry so much about money. And so it almost feels weird to say that, oh yes, my emotional needs were not met. And it almost sounds like, even when I'm saying this to you, it feels like, very, how to say this?
Ungrateful,
maybe selfish. But the reality is, yes, because I'm the oldest of 4 girls. Oh, this almost feels like a therapy session. And then, my younger sister had special needs. But of course, that's why my mom had very little time for me. And that's why I was constantly studying. Because I was like, okay, I need to get X, in the end, I got 266 for my PSLE. I need to get this kind of results so that I can please my mom. And then I realized that as kids, all we're doing is we want to please our moms, our dads.
Yes.
All we want to do is get their approval and their affirmation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? So going back to emotional needs, one of our basic needs for connection. And how do we get that connection? And if we've been given messages that we need to earn their approval in order to secure that connection. That's when we start basing our self-esteem on achievements, whether it's our PSLE grades, whether it's that promotion at work, so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Obviously, now I know my mom was just doing her best, and it took a period of time for me to sort of get over that. And now my mom and I are in a great space. I'm very grateful. And, she can see and she's acknowledged that I was also doing my best, And I love this phrase from one of my coaches, which is, she's just doing the best that she can in the shoes that she's in.
Yes.
And when we can see that,
That's right.
it's very freeing. Rather than bearing a grudge or resentment, it does wonders actually. Yeah. But before we even get there, the acceptance, there is that 5-stage grieving process, right? Can you talk us through that 5-step grief process?
Right. So what you're referring to is the 5 stages of grief. And so the stages are denial. So then after denial, oftentimes we go into bargaining. So for example, if somebody has got cancer and if they're religious, then they might pray to their gods and it's like, if you take this away from me, I promise I'll be a better Christian, a better Buddhist, so on and so forth, because we're trying to bargain. Yes. And if that fails, then we go on to anger. And so then it's like, I've done all these things and you're still not answering my prayers, for example, then it's like, well, I'm going to stop believing. And after the anger phase, when the anger fades a bit more, then that's when we arrive at sadness and feeling sad about, oh, this has happened to me. And then after the sadness phase, then we get into acceptance. So this is not a linear process that people think, oh, okay, I just need to go through the stages one by one and I'll get to acceptance. That's not how it works. So you might find yourself jumping back and forth between some of these feelings, right? Until we finally move on towards acceptance.
I feel I'm acceptance, but there's still some sadness, clearly. I was not expecting myself to get teary. But is it correct to say that a lot of people, when it comes to their parents, they are stuck at the anger stage? Because I see a lot of people speak about their parents or even in-laws with a lot of anger.
Right. So as I've described the stages that commonly after denial, then we move on to anger. And I think that so many of us have denied this when we were younger because it's important, it's paramount for us to maintain our connection with our parents. Young children are very helpless. Their very survival depends on their connection with their parent. So they cannot jeopardize that relationship. So when they feel that some of their needs are not being met, like early on you mentioned, oh, my parents provided for me physically. There's roof over my head. There's food on the table. I'm being ungrateful, because I wanted more from them. I wanted them to understand my emotional needs. So this is a complex situation because the older generation did not understand about emotional needs. They came from a place where their physical needs were not even met. They did not have 3 meals. They did not have clothes or even shoes to go to school. So in their mind, they've done a fantastic job being parents already. Because
they say like, you're so lucky.
Exactly. I think with every generation, all parents try to give their children more than what they have. And I think for the most part, most parents do achieve that. But because that happens, that these needs get met, as the child, we start looking at the next level of needs. So if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The physical needs. So our parents were of the generation where the physical needs were not met. They were able to meet it for us. So that becomes our baseline. So our starting point is higher than our parents. So then, of course, we start expecting more from them. And that's where they are not equipped, because their generation had no access to all this parenting knowledge. And they themselves don't even understand about their own emotional needs. So they can't give us what they don't know. So, but because our starting points are higher and we start, oh, okay, I don't have to worry about my physical needs. So what's next? Oh, my emotional needs. My emotional needs for validation. My emotional needs for attention, for unconditional love, for belonging. All these will then start surfacing. I think as human beings, we seek growth.
Yes.
So once, something's covered, most of the time, automatically, we're going to look at what's next. So that's where that disconnect is for most parent-child relationships. So it's being able to acknowledge that, from our parents' perspectives, they have done a great job. They have provided for us more than what they had. So then sometimes when they hear the children complain, I can, understand that the parents might feel, I've done so much for you, you've got things I never had. And they might view their children as somewhat ungrateful because of that, right? But from the child's perspective, we also got to understand that because those needs were met and that's their starting point, which is higher than the parents, that it's also natural for them to want to evolve and grow into the next level of needs.
Yes.
Right? So I don't think that there's a right or wrong, but this is just how things are. And when we can understand the situation as such, I think we can hold more compassion for both parties, right? And that this is not airing dirty laundry, as you said earlier, or being ungrateful. In therapy, when I explore with my clients about their backgrounds, right? Many of them do feel very self-conscious about sharing these things because in their mind it's, oh, this makes me ungrateful or I'm unfilial. And I say, this is not what we are here for. We're not here to play the blame game. I simply want to understand, what were the needs that were not met for you so that we can now work on meeting those needs to sort of heal our wounds.
And why is it unhelpful to even have a conversation about this with your parent? I will share my experience with my therapist. So my therapist and I discussed. So after I worked everything out, I asked my therapist, do you think it would be helpful for me to speak about this with my mom? And she said, there's no need. And I agree because like you said, it's not that they won't. It's that they can't. They don't have it within them. They were of a different generation. They had access to very different information. And, well, it's not for lack of trying, I think, for me. But I am in a good place in spite of not having that conversation. And I actually don't need to have that conversation. I can accept the situation for what it is because now I have better understanding of myself as well. And I don't blame. I think blaming is the worst because blaming suggests that they are wrong, I'm right. And actually that's also a victim mindset.
Yeah. So it's interesting because many adult children do ask me, should I have this conversation with my parent? And the answer I give them really depends on the context and the kind of relationship they have, their parents' level of self-awareness. So if what they have shared with me is that their parents perhaps are not so educated about emotional needs or are very, very traditional, very uncomfortable with this sort of conversations, that there are many ways to get that healing, right? Whereas most of the times, especially for the younger generation now, the way we've been brought up is that we need to talk through everything.
Yes.
Right? Especially like if you're in a romantic relationship, we must hash out everything and that's the way we get to healing. That's one approach. It's definitely not the only approach. So, yeah, if the other party may not be comfortable with these sort of conversations, if they're not very in touch with their own emotions, and if they cannot hold space, for their child's emotions, then I wonder if having these sort of conversations would probably just reinforce more of that hurt, right? That my parent can't see and understand me. right? But maybe it's the way we want to be seen and understood, that most of us, it's through this verbal validation that there are other ways to get that validation. You know, I think as a society, because we prize reason, many of us don't know how to be comfortable with emotions. So when we can't hold space for our own emotions, we can't hold space for somebody else's emotions. So then when they are expressing those emotions, we sort of give them the message that we're uncomfortable about it and please stop emoting, right? So that I can feel more comfortable.
Yes, because I've been told that I'm too sensitive, I'm too emotional. And now that I'm much older, I know that I'm not.
Right? That the people who told you you were too sensitive and too emotional were probably people who were very uncomfortable with emotions and couldn't hold that space for you.
So thank you, Janet, for sharing. I've learned so much from this, and I guess my favorite takeaway is that it's something that I shared, which is, you know, we are all doing the best that we can. And my favorite takeaway from you is that the older generation, it's not that they will not, they cannot. And there's a very big difference. But yes, thank you so much, Janet, for sharing so much wisdom.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed The Real Reason. And if you did, please share it with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and join us next time on The Real Reason. See you.